It should worry anyone when girls are getting pregnant because they went very far away to fetch water and they were raped, or we are now trading sex for water.
I saw a lot of videos of you at the COP making a lot of noise, saying not loans, you want grants. Did you achieve anything by all the all the noise that happens? I know we usually have a lot of so that's manning to make noise and say this is what you want.
No, I'm laughing because it's not noise. The challenges that the women are facing are actually exacerbated by climate change, the climate crisis.
Yes.
The impact that climate change causes on the environment, health, education, agriculture. It's nearly everything. Yes, is affected. When a girl is abused and molested when she's gone to look for the water, those are statistics, yes, that are collected.
Today, we have Susan Otieno, Executive Director, ActionAid International Kenya, and we shall be speaking about COP29. Welcome.
Thank you, Fiona, and glad to be here today.
Thank you for coming once again, to our show. So, what are the COPs for someone who really doesn't know what a COP is?
So, I'll just say COP. So it means Conference of Parties, and this is in a layman's language, and I like speaking the layman's language because I work with communities that I have to really see that I demystify any language, any information that I share with them. I try to be as basic as possible. Not that they don't understand technical, because they do,
Yes.
but that's not why we engage. We engage to better and improve our lives. So COP simply means Conference of Parties, and in this sense, it's state representatives and accredited observers who would probably come from the civil society, the private sector, and many other representations. And the aim is for people to negotiate, states to negotiate, and especially the COP that we'll be speaking about, which is within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, is majorly negotiations and conversations on how we can ensure that we stop global warming. And so states come in to talk about their contribution, their negotiated contributions. They negotiate in terms of actions that they are taking. There are also states that have been considered as the polluters, and therefore the polluters have also been charged to contribute financially, to contribute in terms of technology, to contribute in terms of knowledge, to be able to support or enable the countries that have been impacted, yet they've polluted the least, and majorly that's the countries in the south. So how are they contributing? This is where they come to give their reports, but it's also where there's negotiation. Majorly by the time we get to the meeting that we will call COP, like the last one that was in Azerbaijan, in Baku, was in late November. That one was majorly for countries to come and negotiate. So you're coming in to negotiate. You've put in your reports. What's your contribution? Are you contributing to the emission? The more you contribute, then the more you'll be expected to put in remedial measures and support other countries that, as I said, the countries in the global south that suffer, yet they produce nearly, I would call it nearly zero, just 2%. So in this sense then, every other country, again, every other state is also expected to put in place mechanisms of addressing the emissions reduction. And so you come in with actions that the state is doing, what you've done. You're given a span of 5, other years can be more years. And of interest now for me, what has been of interest has been the gender element, the National Action Plan around gender. Because when you look at COP again, what we came to realize, the challenges that the women are facing are actually exacerbated by climate change, the climate crisis.
Yes.
The impacts that climate change causes on the environment, health, education, agriculture. It's nearly everything is affected. And so that has always been the major interest.
Yes.
And I've personally participated in 3. But previously I worked with my colleagues who would go in for more than that.
Yes.
I think it's also where I was placed and what I engaged in mostly. But I've gone for 3 COP meetings. I attended the one in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, in 2022. 2023, I was in Dubai, and 2024, I was in Baku.
All right.
Azerbaijan.
What is the main highlights for COP29?
The COP29 was majorly agreeing on the framework for climate financing.
Okay.
If you go back in history, in 2015, the Paris Agreement was that it had specified how we were going to ensure that $100 billion is raised to finance the adaptation mitigation around the climate crisis.
Annually.
And
yes,
this figure has never been reached in a year. And where there was an attempt, majority of the funding that was counted or consolidated or added was majorly loans, debts, and not grants.
Yes.
And so in COP29, African countries went in first to say that even the 100 billion is not enough.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We need it beyond 100 billion.
Yeah.
We saw that there was an effort to move towards 300 billion.
Yes.
And this includes even the private sector, the debts and all that. But what is critical for Africa is not loans or debts.
Yes.
Because African countries are drowning in loans and debts. The same countries that are drowning in loans and debts are also suffering the impact of the climate crisis. So the ask that Africans were putting on the table, and majorly the global south, was that let the financing be in form of grants so that you don't burden the economies that are already debt-stricken. Economies that are on their knees because of debts. But let it be in form of grants. But we are also seeing the states that are tasked to contribute are also saying they do not have funding to contribute, and the funding that they have is actually funding that the private sector is able to marshal. But when you look critically, then you realize that what the private sector is able to marshal is in form of debts, loans. Because, you want to invest and make profit. Of course, there's what we call the 3 Ps: people, planet, profit. But it's difficult for private sector to put in funding where there's no profit, because then what's your sustainability mechanism? But we're saying governments need to take that responsibility of making sure that there is a form of grants mechanism. Secondly, what Africans were going to COP to say was that the funding is not reaching the person who's affected on the ground, the most affected. So in Kenya here, if you're talking about climate change, there's a woman in Wajir, Moyale, who's affected. And do you know how women get affected? They're affected by the normals, the things that we've termed normal context for women.
Yes.
When a woman doesn't go to school, it's normal. When a woman drops out of school because she's pregnant, a girl drops out of school because she's pregnant, it's normal.
Yeah.
When a girl drops out of school because the brother has to continue with schooling, it's normal.
Yeah.
When a girl drops out of school because she has to go help her mother,
Yes.
look for water, that they have to walk the whole day, that they have to walk in areas that are insecure, unsafe, that it's normal. When a girl is abused and molested when she's gone to look for the water, those are statistics
Yes.
that are just collected. When a girl drops out of school and FGM is done and it spikes, it's normal because that is a cultural way of preparing her to get married. When she's married to a 67-year-old, because that is the only man whose animals didn't die because of droughts.
Yeah, and the floods.
Yeah, that's normal because then it's considered he's the wealthy man. And so these are the impacts of climate change that people were not relating with the women.
Yes.
And so the big question was, is this money reaching this kind of people? Is it reaching programs that can change their lifestyle? Or they're remaining disenfranchised? Who's actually in the middle while this money is coming from where it was released, where it's been allocated, up to the time it gets to the community?
Yeah.
So these are some of the conversations and concerns that Africans had. And that's why Africa went in with the hope that there would be a better deal. And if you follow some of the media engagement, some of the interviews that we had, some of the conversations, some of the voicing that we did, we clearly said a no deal is better than a bad deal.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't give people a deal for the sake of it. Give people a better deal.
Yes, we've had many COPs, 29 COPs. And for the critics of COPs, they will say these are just talk shops. We don't have any tangible, results from these discussions and negotiations. We have the developed countries working out during these negotiations. Do you think they really do bring the change that is required in the sphere of climate change?
I think in Kiswahili, the word is kuwajibika. Being accountable.
Yes.
And being responsible. And we are seeing developed countries or countries that have been marked out as the largest polluters, saying they do not want to be termed as the ones who are responsible. And therefore, they do not want to be told to contribute because they are responsible.
The worst polluters, yes.
Yes. They want to contribute because that's what is available, Yet that is not supposed to be the approach. You pollute more, you pay up. But we are saying pay up and phase out from fossil fuel.
Yes.
Pay up and phase out from commercial agriculture. The challenge that we're seeing is that what Africa is proposing as solutions still requires a lot of technology to be able to hype it to a scale where it can bring the long-lasting solution. So if you're talking about agroecology, for instance, as a means of addressing food insecurity, we need mechanization. We need water that has to be powered, not by fossil fuel, but has to be powered by solar.
Yeah.
We need, therefore, the solar technology that is not equipment heavy, but you will not find that in Africa. We will still rely on the European countries. And this is why there was the demand on them that when they are addressing the mitigation or supporting on adaptation, they should be ready to transfer technology. Yet we are not seeing this happening. So that's why somebody can easily say it's talk, but we will talk until something happens because we can't keep quiet. We are seeing its impact. When we are now seeing ourselves retrogressing on the gains that we made, it should worry anyone when girls are no longer in school. It should worry anyone when girls are getting pregnant because they went very far away to fetch water and they were raped, or we are now trading sex for water.
Yes.
Just because a boda guy can carry 10, 20-liter jerrycans and bring them to closer to you, the next demand is you give in for sex and I give you water. By the way, at the same time, because the demand is high, you're paying for the water, but sex is an additional requirement.
Yes.
So we are seeing girls falling pregnant. We're seeing girls dropping out of school. We're seeing girls getting married early. In fact, for me, but just by the way, there's nothing as early marriage. Early marriage is when an individual has said, I want to get married at 30, but to get married at 24. For me, that's early marriage.
Yeah.
When you marry a girl who is 18 years, you've not married a girl who is 18 years.
Yes.
You are constantly molesting and defiling that girl.
Yes.
Because there's no consent that they'll give her before 18.
Yes.
And they are unawares of what you're getting them into. So we are seeing increase of child defilement. We are seeing increase of abduction. We are seeing increase of child labor. Because then you want people who can go and fetch this water. Children are fetching water, selling it to get food because the land, whatever was plowed, dried up. And the very worst one, we have seen violence increasing at home. Because if you're looking at the pastoralist community, you've lost everything. Then you come back home, you lost like 800 shots of goats, or you lost 700 cows, or 500 camels. And you've walked near Ethiopia borders. And now you have to walk back with nothing. And you get home and we come and ask you for food. We've seen men commit suicide because of impacts of climate change. And so these are the things that many of us go to COPs to raise and tell them we are still having an increase in these things. Therefore, it means the efforts that we needs to be doubled, need to be made more frequent, the funding need to be increased. The mechanism needs to reach the people who are affected.
Does Africa go there? Do African countries speak with one voice? Do we need to speak with one voice? For example, the African Union? Or is it okay if we speak very many voices, different perspectives? What works best, in your own opinion?
Thank you for that. We have the Africa Group of Negotiators, and that's one of the largest number. So Africa can never be ignored in a COP negotiation. Africa can never be ignored because they have the numbers, they have the experience that they are facing, and they also have solutions that ought to be adopted and put on the table. So Africa cannot be ignored. And I saw a united front by the Africa Group of Negotiators.
During the recent COP, yes.
Yes. And plus other countries from the global south, the least developed country, there was that unit. They call it the G77. There was that unity to push for what was going to work for the global south. I think what needs to be interrogated is the commitment of the developed countries, the commitment from Europe, the commitment from the US needs to be interrogated. Yeah. You cannot say you will only do X when this other person is doing their bits. No. You industrialized before everybody else. And there's evidence of pollution.
Yes.
There's evidence that because of the burden that we are now pushing climate financing to originate from private sectors. Country to country negotiations, state to state negotiations. Maybe USA will come and negotiate with Kenya and tell them our private sector would want to come and invest as they mitigate for climate change. Therefore, you need to give them subsidies. There's evidence that the subsidies that we are giving the foreign investors just here in Africa alone, that amount is enough to pay for education requirements 3 times. There's evidence that if we stopped giving them subsidies, we will be able to fund our education. Why is Kenya privatizing education? Because there's no funding. But we are not collecting what we need to collect as domestic financing by giving subsidies, tax incentives, Yeah, so once we do that, we are missing out on income that we would have collected to fund education. So it's about putting demands on countries that are supposed to finance climate change to honor their pledges. It's important. But not only to honor your pledge and reduce on emission. That's also critical.
So at COP28, there was the operationalization of the loss and damage fund, which was about 700 million pledged for support. How is this? What do they mean by operationalization? Does it really trickle down to the people like you've spoken, the people mostly affected by climate change? And who's held accountable? Who holds who accountable to ensure that these monies actually get to the people?
So the UN has a responsibility. Yeah, it's a global responsibility that has been vested on it by the member states. So that is part of why they are the ones who are convening the UNFCCC meetings, the COP meetings, why they are the ones who are championing and convening them. But states are expected to hold each other accountable. That's why you come back to report. You come back to speak about it. And it's not just in the COP meeting. By the way, by the time we get to the COP meeting, a lot of meetings have happened at continental level, ministerial level, the technocrats. Many meetings do happen that build up to the COP meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are various conversations.
Yes.
For a country to be effective, for a country to participate effectively, there is need for close engagement. And just to say that COP conversations are not just for states. This is why civil societies like where I work at ActionAid, we prioritize the COP conversation. And we don't prioritize them to listen and observe how the negotiations are going only, but also to bring in the experiences that we are gathering from the ground. Commitment, is it reaching the poor people? Is it reaching the people living in poverty? Is it reaching the women? Is there improvement? Is technology being transferred? These are the questions. When you're talking about solar energy, who is holding the technology? Because if I hold the technology, definitely I'll disenfranchise you if I want to. I'll come in with the rights, the patents. What will happen to you? You'll still have to cough out a lot of money to acquire, and then I'll continue benefiting from the intellectual IP rights. So how do we ensure that technology is transferred? That is why even as we go for COP meetings, when we come back home, the most important thing is to ask ourselves, what are the adaptation measures that we're putting in place? What are the mitigation measures? Africa has continued to say that we want adaptation more than mitigation because we can't even feed ourselves. Yet, Africa can be food secure if supported. If the debts are written off, Africa can be able to push the domestic financing, the resources that we are able to collect, the taxes to the right adaptation mechanism.
I saw a lot of videos of you at the COP making a lot of noise, saying, not loans, we want grants. Did you achieve anything by all the all the mess that happens? I know we usually have a lot of organizations planning to make noise and say, this is what we want.
No, I'm laughing because it's not noise. You can communicate in many ways. You can write a letter, you can call, You can appear. You can also speak up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you spoke up.
You need to influence and create space for influencing. While the negotiations go on, every day there's a briefing. So if you're part of the observer mission, there's a briefing either by your state. So for some of us who came from Kenya, and I love the Kenyan mission, by the way. Every day they would brief us, they would update us and tell us this is where we are. We are hitting a deadlock here. We are almost here. They would come out and brief us.
Yeah.
I remember when the gender content was being discussed, and there were certain particular countries that were holding others ransom, just simply because of the terminologies that were being used. Others were saying we just want two gender. Others were saying no, we have to be inclusive. There's that conversation, and it's a global conversation. But it's almost held everyone out until the gender component was threatened. And so when such come out, we know that we are also meeting other members of the civil society from other countries. So we are able to communicate to them and tell them, no, when you're engaging with your people, please push for this agenda. So those are the kind of negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
But as an African delegate, I'm able to. I remember I had a meeting with the Dutch parliamentarian to the European Parliament, and we met her, and I was part of a team that met her, and we were able to tell her, please, this is what we want you to pass on to your government, to the European governments. You're able to influence. So it's not noise. There's no noise. There's no noise. There's no noise. It's if you listen when people are talking, if you listen very well, you'll find the message. There's always message.
Definitely.
It's maybe the repetitive nature of it, then it would probably appear as noise, but there's never noise at COP. It's just communicating and communicating. And the more we repeat, the more it means that somebody is not listening, and the more we cause people also to listen. Because if you're a delegate and you're passing and someone is saying, hey, do not ignore the gender component.
Yes.
As you go in, you'll be asking, what was the gender component that is being pushed? Why has it stalled? What can we do? How can we push it in? How do we make sure that we are taking care of this aspect? But there's no climate justice without gender justice. That's just the bottom line. There's no climate justice without gender justice. Yeah.
Thank you. So still at COP29, there was a lot of criticism on the lack of phasing out the fossil fuels. What can be done? What more can be done by the civil society organizations to push for this? Because this is a critical element when you talk about climate change in any country.
So there's what we call collaborations. And the global South to North collaborations are very critical. When I'm in the South, I'm able to tell my counterparts in the North that this is still happening. We are still seeing companies funded from the US by funding from the US government, US banks, let me talk of the banks majorly, funding private sector to come and engage in industrial agriculture, to come and engage in fossil fuel in the global South. So if we see this and we raise it to the North, they are able to engage their governments. It is true that it's not going down. And it's because of the false narrative that people are coming in to talk about the carbon market. Instead of looking at carbon market as a way of reducing emission, while they reduce production of the greenhouse gases, yes. People have are looking at carbon markets as a way of saying, let me continue polluting, you absorb it for me, I'll pay you. Yes. So I'm making profits that I will use to pay you. Yes. And even if you look at the profit that is used to pay for the carbon, to buy the carbon credits, yes, or to trade within the carbon market, it is still lower than the profits that they are making as they continue to emit and pollute. So that's why we are saying, let's not engage in false narratives. And that's why it's going to be very difficult if we will continue focusing on carbon market and forget about adaptation and other mitigative measures.
So for you, carbon credits really is not a solution.
Carbon markets should not be viewed in isolation.
Yes.
Work on reduction as we absorb what has been emitted. You see. But if you view it in isolation and say, aren't you doing carbon market? We are continuing to produce, then we are continuing to pollute because somebody else is absorbing what I'm producing. No. The focus should be reduce the pollution as we also work on the absorption.
We've had some, say, a couple of organizations that are actually promoting carbon markets, and there's also noise about this. There's still quite a lot of misinformation, perhaps. A lot of information is not known about how the carbon markets is working, who's supposed to regulate this and ensure that communities sometimes are not taken for granted or taken for a ride when it comes to some of these initiatives being, pushed. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So governments have a responsibility. If you remember the Africa Climate Summit 2023,
Yes,
where Kenya hosted it here in Nairobi. Before that, the Climate Change Act 2016
yes,
had to be amended. Why? Because we were coming to engage in conversations on carbon markets and we didn't have legislation. And Kenya is actually tops in many of the conversation on legislation. Kenya is really leading in Africa.
yes.
Kenya is also leading in terms of green energy. Yeah, almost 70% of our energy is green. And so Kenya had to look into the carbon market legislation and ensure that the Climate Change Act 2016 is amended to incorporate the carbon markets. And when that amendment was done, of course, it was done in a rush, and therefore, as civil society, we felt it needed more of public participation. And that's what we've been asking the government to do, that they continue with the participation now as they do the regulations and the guidelines. They should ensure that communities are aware. What is the benefit sharing within it? How do you negotiate? And who are the technocrats who are negotiating? Who is quantifying? Who's quantifying this? And how are you buying my carbon? How I'm selling, they call it carbon credits.
Yes.
Because I'm absorbing. How are you paying for it? Okay. When I absorb your carbon.
Yes.
How are you paying for it? What is the technology that I've used in the mode of absorbing your carbon? Because technology also matters. High tech, people are being paid more. Nature-based, like trees, and because you cannot guarantee me a 30-year of holding the carbon, like the carbon sinking, people are doing underground in other countries, then I pay you less, you see. So are we really benefiting? We are not benefiting because we lack the knowledge, there's poor negotiation, but worst of all is that they're middlemen. And unless the middlemen are restricted by regulation, then the common person will be busy. Yeah? Because the common phrase now is that Ogieks, for instance, have been told, move out of the forest. His forest now has been carved out for carbon credit. Yeah. But who's being paid? And what are they getting? And for how long will they get what they're getting? Were they part of the negotiations? Did they participate? Did they agree to the decision making? How was it initiated?
Yes.
And don't forget that when you're asking me to, let's talk of biofuel, for instance, as an alternative mode of fuel, or I plant trees instead of food, I'm already insecure.
Yes.
You get it?
Yes.
I'm not getting food. So I can't, if people cannot have 2 meals a day or even 1 meal a day, if there are people going hungry, sleeping hungry in Africa, will I plant trees or should I be encouraged to produce food?
Yes.
You see?
Yes.
So there are those controversies. And then there's the politics in it, that the governments negotiate away from the common man, and then they come and implement it where the common man is.
Yes.
Where is public participation? Kenya has a very good law on public participation. Where is it?
Yes.
Who is negotiating?
Yes.
Who is sitting on the table? Why are we considering it to be very technical? Why don't we talk to the people and tell them?
Yes. Still on that public participation, we have, like you've said, we have various processes of negotiating about climate change, adaptation, mitigation. For instance, the annual CBA, community-based adaptation meetings that are usually held annually. And I remember I attended one, I think in 2018 or 2019 in Addis. And the question is, in as much as you're talking about community-based adaptation, who are the people speaking for the communities? Do we have the real communities affected by climate change coming to these meetings? And for ActionAid, do you carry the community members to some of these top-notch climate change events to speak for themselves?
For us, and even for me as a person, if I'm in such a space, it's not for me.
Yes.
While I'm also impacted, but it's for the most marginalized. And therefore, it's usually an attempt to ensure that we go with them to the spaces. In Egypt, the numbers were not so restricted. We had one of the community members that we went with. In Baku, in Dubai, we also had one. But in Baku, because of the numbers were so restricted. And therefore, we could not manage. But we do not speak for the communities. We can speak on their behalf where they're not present,
Yes.
but make reference to them. But majorly, we ensure that we create the space for them to go.
Yeah.
So it's also the ask that when such meetings are organized, how do they provide space for the
Communities.
Now the challenge with the COP is that the term CBA, when you're talking within adaptation and with the communities, you'll find it come up as a community-based adaptation mechanisms. But when you get into COP with the technocrats,
Yes.
and you talk of CBA, for them, it is collective bargaining agreements. So sometimes their terminology in COP that if if you don't run along with them,
Yeah.
you get lost. I get lost every day.
Yes.
Every time it's like, okay, CBA, because I know
CBA for COPs or topic
are we within adaptation? Then I'll move down there. Or are we talking about this? Yeah, but it's quite an interesting conversation when you get to it. The bargaining process, the negotiation, yeah. But what we've seen, the developed countries are yet to really come with the whole honesty on the table.
Let's speak about the nationally determined contributions. Do communities participate in these processes?
It is considered that they participate,
Yes.
but it's through representation. It's quite a process, and it's a very tedious process. That if community members are not held to continue to participate, while we also ensure that when I go back home, I have food on the table, then I may give up on the way. And this is what happens, even in the negotiations.
Yes.
It is dragged and it is pushed to the last day so that the African negotiators from poor countries have to stay 2 or 3 extra days. You have to change your flights. Where are you getting the money to do that? And so some of the negotiators who are probably sponsored may not have the funding. Then they have to start going. Some of the observers who are meant to be there to keep adding pressure will have to leave. So like Baku, I think it extended for 2 days. It is draining. a 14-day conversation is very great.
Yes. Anyway, I saw a lot of conversations online, and people say that the next COP should be held in the places that are mostly affected by climate change. They should go to the the desert areas. They should go to people really experiencing climate change at the bottom level. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so the COPs keep moving by regions, and the capacity of a country to host is also something to consider. That is why the numbers that were in Dubai and Baku, you can't compare. The numbers that were in Sharm el-Sheikh and Baku, you equally cannot compare.
Yeah.
So there are certain things we have to accept. What are your muscles at that point? I mean, it's not only with COP. In March last year, I was in New York for the CSW, and many Africans didn't get visas to go to the. In October, we had the Women, Peace and Security meeting. Many Africans, I remember we had 3 women that we work with from Kenya that we wanted them to go. And they did the applications, and we even appealed, and they were denied visas. So I was here with a visa, and I'm asking myself, I don't want to travel alone.
Yes.
I didn't go. You see.
Okay.
I just didn't go because the people that I wanted them to go, and I don't experience conflicts in my context.
Yeah.
But they're experiencing conflict in Baringo, in Tiati, they are experiencing conflict.
Mm-hmm.
We had women from Uganda, women from Ethiopia who could not travel because the visas were denied. So I think if a country has to host, we also have to look at the expenses because accommodation becomes very expensive. The food inside the venues become very expensive. And these are some of the things that we have to consider. But the capacity of the country is also something to consider. Yeah.
COP30 at the end of this year.
Oh, in Brazil. Are you knowing what is it? Where is this city? Belém, in Brazil.
So it's really outside the capital city.
I'm not so familiar with Brazil, but I would imagine it must be an accessible place.
Okay.
Yeah. What we want to see is Brazil as a country is also a country that has grown in its advocacy, but it's also here with the forests affected so much when you talk about the carbon market. So we'd also want to see how countries are going to run behind each other as we talk about carbon market, as we talk about climate change in general. So it's an interesting place to be. The Amazon.
Yes.
Yes. It's an interesting place to be. And also to learn and see whether carbon markets, carbon credit conversations are actually benefiting the locals or there are few people who are benefiting. I can't say yet whether I'll be going or not.
Yes.
But it's an important space for any organization, any foundation, anyone as an individual who can afford, who's looking into climate change to be there, but majorly just sponsoring the affected community.
Sometimes they usually say that sometimes organizations plan a tad bit late towards the conference.
Not organizations, Africa.
Yes. How can, Africa plan better for COP parties so that the agenda can be set quite early on what needs to be done?
We should be having a plan now. People should start applying for visas now. You don't need to just wait for the accreditation. You can apply for whatever business travel. You can do it early enough. For instance, as ActionAid, we have ActionAid Brazil. There's a lot more that somebody can do while you're there before even the COP. And all these can be combined. So it's again about enhancing the south to south collaboration, but we are hoping that it will not limit so much the numbers so that we can really have people who are affected to come and talk about COP. But even so, in terms of preparations, there's what we call the pre-COPs, which are conversations that ought to be happening frequently. And this is what we need to encourage from a local perspective. You know, that girl in school can do a pre-COP because they'll tell you how they suffered during the drought season. And you'll be able to document and keep putting the information together that you use for influencing. You not only wait to be in Belém to influence, you can start now. You can start talking about it. And as I said, by the time you get to the COP meeting itself, things were negotiated. People are just coming to farm up. In fact, what is interesting is that people argue about texts. That this word is not the right one here. You know, you need to move it here. You're putting a lot of responsibility when you say that we are responsible.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So we want the contributions to be voluntary. These people now argue about terminologies, but the critical, concrete, technical conversations happened elsewhere. Bonn is a very critical meeting. The AU also convenes a lot of these meetings, which is very critical and important. And I think governments should do so. Yeah.
What are the key takeaways of COP29 that will inform your organization's perhaps advocacy strategy on climate change this year?
Energy is critical for development. That's one of the things that I picked. Energy is critical. And solar, for that matter, or green, renewable, just, feminist, transition energy is important. And so even as we continue talking about adaptation, we need to see how we use the mitigative measures to spur up adaptation. How do we use energy to ensure that we are mechanizing agriculture to produce food? How do we put together the information that we have and share with the community on carbon credit? It's here, it's part of the law. We may say no, we may fight it, but as we are fighting, those who are entering into it, how are we helping them? So that when they decide, it's a choice, it's a decision they make. Yeah. If they decide to go for it, how do we support them? How do we demystify the pieces of legislation? Again, the problem with Kenya is that when you want to engage in the climate change space, even invest, you have to look nearly 40-something pieces of legislation from every corner to put them together for you to be able now to say, now I have a legislative framework that is, I understand. Yeah. So how do we ensure that all this is put in one place? The Gender National Action Plan was also being reviewed. How do we ensure it captures the real content, the real issues? But one of the takeaways, and a major one for me, is I realized that people think in COP that gender are conversations that women are having. It's not. Gender should be in each and every statement, each and every room, each and every negotiating table. Considerations on the impact of climate change need to take a gender lens, because at the end of it all, women are impacted. Women, and it's on their faces that you will see the impacts of climate change.
Thank you. I think today we'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us your insights on the COPs. And definitely we'll have to come back and talk more about climate change, and especially gender and the role of communications in all these matters on climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.